All right, well, let's finish up a little bit here on the intuition, the nature of intuition, and the things that make it powerful, and actually the perils of it as well. And so, when we talk about intuition, there are a few key points to keep in mind here. Um, Intuition, and ultimately, the first one to keep in mind is that most intuition plays a very, very big role. And so it's not necessarily an issue of um, intuition in and of itself is bad. Intuition plays a very big role and part of it comes from experience um, in research and other components of life itself. So intuition plays a very big role. It most of the time it is adaptive. It allows us to shortcut some processes that we would otherwise look at as in a very slow and kind of laborious way. Part of the reason is because essentially our two-track mind allows us to process information at an amazing speed, and we can look at not only the particulars, but we can also look at the entire picture and make some conclusions accordingly. The other one, and this is true when you look at it from a variety of vantage points, but the other one is experience plays a huge role in intuition. You know, how do detectives, how do other people that are kind of investigators, how do they know where to look? Even as a counselor, when I talk to people, based on the experience I've had, I tend to respond to different things than counselors, first-time counselors, because out of that experience, I have a sense of where I want to go, or what kinds of things tip me off to the nature of what people are wrestling with. And so experience plays a very, very big role in intuition and how it impacts the nature of what we do. So even though it's not something that I would spend a lot of time doing, like this guy down here, in terms of checking the sex of chicks, after you get very practiced at a particular task, it becomes almost intuitive to do, because you are so practiced at it that actually, interestingly enough, the more practiced you become, the more flexible you become in responding to different dynamics and different adaptations. And that's the other word, is like I mentioned up above, is it allows me to be way more adaptive in a particular situation simply because of the experience I've experienced. And the one last thing, and I'll reiterate something that's in your book, is that intuition, one way to think of intuition itself is that intuition is analysis, and this is from a Nobel laureate, somebody who's been awarded the Nobel Prize in their particular area, is intuition is analysis frozen into habit. And that's what is key here, is that after I've done something for such a long time, what we think as intuition is actually something that has become so repetitive, so common to me, that it becomes just simply part of the habit of what I do. Now, we have one last area when we're talking about thinking, and that is other species. Now, one of the interesting questions in at least my household with our animals, specifically dog and cat, is, do animals think? And I hope that when I pose a question like that, my hope is that the first question that arises in your mind is, or response would be, how do we define thinking? particularly when it comes to animals. There's a lot that we do with animals that is what my father-in-law was a veterinarian for many, many years, way over 3 or 4 decades. And he used to jokingly say that we anthropomorphize our animals. In other words, we make them human. We say they're thinking. So when a dog cocks his head, he's thinking, or he's not sure. And see, all of those things are instinctual behaviors that animals will do. And so, but there are, if we're talking about, for example, problem solving, animals clearly engage in problem solving. That can be seen in an animal like this one down here, this bird, who essentially is using a stick to get a piece of food out of a test tube. And nobody taught them that. They use, and this idea of tools is really part of the key when it comes to animals. In each of these examples here, down in each of these areas, are where animals are using tools, whether they're using a stick or whether they're using a heavy rock to open a palm nut, or dolphins using, down here where you see a dolphin using a sponge to kick up a variety of things on the ocean bottom in order to get food. Same way with the great apes, we see a variety of tools being used amongst animals themselves. And so the few things that we actually know and we've noticed, which I found and I continue to find quite fascinating, as sheep are particularly good at recognizing faces, which from my perspective, and which I find quite interesting, is that when you think about the 23rd Psalm, which everybody knows, the shepherd's psalm, you know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Now, we are likened to sheep. And Jesus even talks about the fact that the sheep know my voice and I know them. And it's fascinating to me to look at, even in nature, that sheep are particularly good at remembering people's faces, which would make them quite connected then to their shepherd. And it's fascinating to see different species' capacity to do that. Chimpanzees, chimps, and a couple different species of monkeys seem to have a capacity to read intent. I would suggest to you that some dogs do as well, particularly dogs that tend to be more alpha-like dogs. In other words, they tend to be the king of the pack of dogs. They read intent. So if you maintain eye contact way too long, they take that as a threat, and that's part of the overall aspect of thinking, you know, as reading intent. Kohler, who was the one that I mentioned a little earlier, and looked at insight in apes, is really where we begin to see some of the things that we begin to know about other species. So insight is shown by Sultan. That was the ape that was in the pen that I just referred. Using tools, transmitting culture. It's clear in the wild where the apes and some of the chimpanzees will teach their young how to use tools through modeling and so forth. And other cognitive skills begin to show up, like basic concepts, being shaped by reinforcement in becoming tool users, some numerical capacity. The thing that separates us from all the other species is really capacity and ceiling. And that's the one that I want to emphasize to you. Separates humans from basically the rest of the animal kingdom is capacity and the whole idea even of self-consciousness. Is we have this capacity where animals themselves tend to have a ceiling on what they know. So even apes in their language development is about second grade, is about as high as they seem to get. That's not true, obviously, in humans. We get way, way beyond that, and generally it's measured by the actual vocabulary. But we see some basic elements in other species in using what we might refer to as thinking processes, and those are key to just pay attention to even as we understand what thinking is. We can practice or we can watch animals display this kind of problem solving, tool using, those sorts of things, but that doesn't necessarily make them, just because we have similar characteristics, it doesn't necessarily make them into our predecessors. All right, that's it for Module 27. We will turn our attention now to language and thought in Module 28. I will talk to you soon.